to the Glacier Song podcast once more. Today, I have an incredible guest I'm very excited about. She is Cymene Howe. She was part of the Global Glacier Sound meditation that we did previously, but now today we're gonna have a chat about how we relate to glaciers and personal projects and encounters we had. So, Simini is a climate anthropologist, and yes, we met through the International Year of Glacier Preservation. And now she was just telling me that, yeah, we met through glaciers in two different ways, and but we've never met in person, you were saying.
Yeah. And I was saying that it's cool that we've met through glaciers. And the word cool is a great word because when we're talking about glaciers, because they're cool. And it's also just cool in the way that cool is cool.
Yeah, fantastic. I love to open the podcast like that. So cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I remember when I arrived to Iceland 2021 and I got to know about your movie Not Og, the movie about the glacier Og that you did with your colleague Dominic, and I also got to know a bit through Andre, and I was wondering how was your first encounter with Og, and what brought you to Og Glacier, no? Which is, just for context, is like this glacier in Iceland that has already disappeared due to climate change, disappeared actually in 2014. And you were probably one of the first women to go approach the glacier and inquire a little bit with people what was going on as well.
Yeah, that was a really interesting encounter because I was doing a research project in Iceland about how Icelanders were feeling about the loss of ice in their country, a country called Iceland.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, I'm a climate anthropologist. And so my research project was really just about how are people feeling about the loss of ice in their country that has represented who they are as a people in so many ways on the landscape. About 10% of the island country is covered in ice. And as Andrei Snær Magnusson likes to say, if you covered the entire country in ice, with the ice that exists on the country's surface, it would be about 2 meters of ice covering the entire country if you laid it out evenly
Mm-hmm.
across the surface.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the country of Iceland is losing about 11 billion tons of ice every year because of melt, because of global warming. And so they're losing an incredible amount of ice every year. It's melting away. So it's transforming the place, it's transforming the landscape. And I was curious about how it was transforming the way people felt about the land and about their identity and about their history. So
Hmm.
I was going around the country and talking to people about these changes, these sentiments. And so I was looking for places where people were in close contact with glaciers, people who live near glaciers.
Yeah.
So what do? You look at the map and you see where there's settlements near glaciers. And I was looking at the map and I found this little tiny glacier on the map and it was called OK. And
Yeah.
because I'm a speaker of English, I thought that's hilarious. This little
Yeah.
glacier is called OK. It says it's okay. And but then I knew,
Hmm.
as someone who's familiar with climate change, I thought, I'm sure it's not okay. I'm sure it's melting like all of the other glaciers in Iceland. They're all melting, right? So I thought it can't be okay. I know it's got to be melting. So I tried to find out more about it. I went online, of course. I looked into the research. I went to the University of Iceland. I tried to find out information about it. And there was almost nothing. There was almost
That's
nothing written about it.
so interesting.
There was just nothing. And not in Icelandic and not in English either. And I just found this little tiny report in this English language magazine, and it was very short. It was like 76 words, written by this glaciologist that said it was no longer a glacier.
Wow.
It said Okiokot's no longer a glacier.
And that's like everything that until that date was written in human history about this glacier that disappeared.
It was a very, it was just very, very minimal. And I
Hmm.
got deeper into it and I found out that it had been written about in the Icelandic sagas, these
Yeah,
thick sagas. But even in the sagas, it
yeah,
had hardly a mention. It's mentioned on 2 pages,
yeah,
and it's literally a passing reference.
yeah,
It just says in the sagas, a guy passed by it on a horse.
yeah,
Literally a
yeah,
passing
yeah.
reference. And yet and yet when you
Hmm.
talk to people in Iceland, everyone knew about this little glacier because everyone in school learns about the glaciers when they're about in middle school. They learn about all the mountains and all the glaciers in the country in their geography class.
Hmm.
So when you talk to people and you say, "Oh, do you know this little glacier called Ok?" They say, "Oh yeah, of course I know that glacier. That's the glacier with the funny name."
Yeah,
It's a weird little name. Even in
yeah.
Icelandic, it's a weird name.
Yeah,
And
because all the other glaciers have long, complicated names, Salhulma, and that's probably one of the easiest anyway.
right, they
Um,
all have very long, sort of, yes, very long, complex Icelandic names. And this one has the short, funny little
uh,
name.
mhm.
And
And
and it
yeah,
means in Icelandic, it means burden, like a yoke, like a burden that you would put on an animal, like an ox that's pulling a cart. And so it's a weird, short little name in Icelandic, and it's a weird name for a glacier. And so it was this kind of, I mean, from a
yeah,
storytelling,
let me make an incision here with the name because it's something that has been talked a lot also in this podcast and in my project. And when I talked to Andrea as well, and yes, he said it's this burden that you carry on your shoulders, which is interesting. And at the same time, it's also something for carrying the water, and the meaning that most uh, got me was the meaning of the egg, the zygote, the union of masculine and feminine, and something that, I'd like to talk a little bit more later. But it feels like it's a glacier that, despite being small and minimal and not having been seen and noticed that much by humans, it carries a lot of significance, a lot of cosmovision, and a lot of and also historically now, no, like it's been the first to melt due to climate change in Iceland. So um, sometimes maybe we like overlook um, things maybe by being small, but how relevant it is, no?
right? Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think that was part of the impulse to do the movie is that as an outsider, like as someone from the United States, as an anthropologist, it was like seeing that this glacier had basically disappeared, that it had died. And it was a funny little glacier, but everyone in Iceland knew about it, but no one really recognized, there was no recognition of its dying, of its passing.
Wow.
And yet, as you just said, it was the first glacier to die because of climate change. So to me, this was like this threshold event. Like it was a big moment in Iceland,
Yes.
in the country, but it was also a big moment in the world, right? It's a big moment for us to recognize as people and as human beings. And so it's sort of like, what do we do to recognize these things? Like, how do we take these moments into account? And so it felt like it needed attention. Like it felt like this is
Yes.
something that needs a focus and it needs an attention because no one's paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because in retrospect, when I've talked to Andre about it, in retrospect, like after the movie and after we did this memorial for Ok,
Mm-hmm.
he he said, in Iceland, if we memorialized everything that changed on the landscape, everything that died, everything that got disrupted and was laid to waste, that's all we'd be doing. And, Icelanders are in general pretty humble people. And we don't want to make a big deal out of everything. And so it's sort of like to him it felt like too much to try to do this, like to sort of make a big deal out of a little glacier that died almost felt like an
Mm,
exaggeration, like
interesting though.
too much drama around a little thing. So there's also an expression in Icelandic, and I can't say it in Icelandic, but it basically says like the eye of the guest sees everything.
Oh wow. Yeah, that's very, very on point.
Very interesting. And in some ways, it's a kind of, some ways it can be used as kind of a scolding thing, like the eye of the guest when they come over to your house, like they see the dirt in the, they see the dirt on the floor, or like your mother-in-law comes over and she sees that,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
haven't
yeah.
cleaned recently. But it's also like the eye of the guest notices things that you yourself don't notice.
Yes.
And as an anthropologist, what we do professionally is we are the eye of the guest. Like that's what we do, right? We go to other places
Exactly.
and we notice things because we're outsiders, and we notice things because we're out of context. And so
Yes.
I think for me and for Dominic, like doing this work, it's like we were really struck by the loss of auk.
Mm,
And I don't know, like I think if we had been Icelanders, I'm not sure we would have been struck by it in the same way. Maybe we would have been, but I think being outsiders, we were struck by it. And we're like, this is something important. This is something we should draw attention to. And then when we did, and when we made the memorial, it turned out that other people in the world also felt like, yeah, this
noticed it.
something that we should be paying attention to. And the movie, not so much, but the memorial that then we ended up doing. And honestly, the reason that we did the memorial was because we needed kind of a culmination for the movie. We're like, how do we end this movie? And we felt like the way to end the movie was to have this ritual at the end. And
Mm.
so it started like that ritual, that memorial on top of the mountain started in kind of a banal way, which just like
Yeah.
we needed a way to end the movie, but then
Mhm.
the memorial itself ended up becoming
Becoming
a
something
much
deeper.
bigger piece of art than this little movie, in truth.
That's very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. And I remember as part of the movie, like you talk to so many people, and you talk also to a priest in Reykjavik probably or around, and he was saying that actually, we're talking about memorials, and it's like the rituals and memorials are actually for the living more than for the dead. And I thought that was also a very good point, and also what we're doing in this time, in this historical time of losing of the glaciers. um, in my perspective and experience, like we need some rituals, we need some activities, we need some experiences to, is not maybe for the glacier that much, but is for us, for the grief, for the transformation of our world, and how we connect also through these acts to something that is bigger than us and that goes across generations. No, so do you think in telling Ock's story, and or making Ock noticed by humans, there is some legacy for future generations to relate with glaciers differently, to relate with nature differently? Like, is there a point in that?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's maybe the best thing we can do while we're here on Earth is to create stories and practices and ways of being better for the future, right? For future generations. A lot of indigenous people in the Americas and all over the world talk about being better ancestors.
Yes, yes.
Being a better ancestor, when you really think about what that means, is being in better practices now so that future
Mm.
generations can look back at you and say that they did the best that they could, not the worst that they could. So we have a long way to go, right? So I think we have a lot of practices that we need to change in this generation. Um, I think one of the really nice moments when we had that memorial on top of Oak Mountain in 2019 is there was a young woman with us, an Icelandic environmental activist, who's now a member of the Icelandic parliament.
Mm,
She was, I think she was 17 at the time that she was up there. And she said some words up there, and she said, "My grandchildren will ask me where I was this day,
yes.
the day that we memorialized the passing of Okyokut." And
Yeah.
it was really, it's giving me a little chill right now. It was
Mm,
super powerful because here's this young woman
yeah.
thinking about her grandchildren on top of the mountain in the cold, in the wind. And she's already thinking 3 generations later,
Yes.
right? And you know, Andre loves to do the math about those generations
Exactly.
and sort of like think into the future that way, which is a great thing to do. Um, but I love that she was doing that too.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so these kind of lasting practices are really important. And so the way she's thinking is the way we ought to be thinking more. And
Yeah. Yeah.
people, we humans are pretty, at our best, we can think about our children and our grandchildren, maybe our great grandchildren. I think the best of us can start thinking like 7 generations, 10 generations. That's where it gets really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And I heard of indigenous practice as well of, for every decision you make, the practice of thinking of 7 generations earlier and 7 generations forward, no, and where does that take you? And that makes me actually think of something that I can tease a little bit to our listeners, because there's something coming in the, all the project that I'm doing with glaciers, the water the lover, that is part of this, and good ancestor thinking is part of this visionary thinking, and is part of um, making a collective artwork, making a collective community that can carry this voice of glaciers, can carry this wisdom of glaciers that we are receiving now as we are getting in touch with them, and that can carry this into 100 years time. That, it's certainly a point in which we will not be here in our physical body, but it's a way of thinking with how the people that will be our descendants, no, or the people that will be living as humanity in 100-year time, how we can carry the waters from the now until then into something meaningful and into something that connects different generations. So yeah, it just invites people to be in contact in Instagram and newsletter for more information about that. And for sure there'll be also more in the podcast soon about this glacier drop ancestor community or society that is going to begin soon.
Well,
Yeah,
sound that sounds really cool. Can I say something that brought to mind when you were
yes,
just
for sure.
we hear about these kind of tech bros and Silicon Valley people like the Elon Musks and
Mm,
his buddies of the world who want to upload themselves into the cloud so that they can live forever,
yeah.
right? This kind of digital technology to do that because they want to
Mm,
be whatever, eternal. That's like a really weird way of being everlasting. When I think about being everlasting, the truth of the matter is that we live in human bodies and we are all going to die. Like
yeah,
we are living beings, we are biological entities. All of us here on earth now, you and I,
yeah,
everyone who's listening right now, we are all going to die.
yes,
Everyone who we know on earth or will ever know are
yeah,
all going to die at some
yeah.
point.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that glaciers do not need to die. and that what we do in the world can make it so that they do not. And so, one way of being everlasting or having an eternal impact is to keep those glaciers from dying. And that can be an everlasting impact and a way of being eternal that actually could be a very beautiful way of being eternal. And having yourself live on in the world through this beautiful piece of ice that lives somewhere on the planet. And that would be a pretty incredible way of being an everlasting entity rather than the other form.
Yeah,
Just
you're
saying.
getting quite transcendental here, and I love it so much. And I think it's super interesting, and something that sometimes we know in our day to day, we seem to forget this. Yeah, this. Um, we have limited amount of time, and glaciers work on another scale. They're also moving. They're also like, everything in nature, mountains, glaciers, like they all also live and die. But I think the point also that sometimes Andrew makes is like it's not at a human scale, it is as a geological scale, and that and if it's not because of us, like glaciers should like last much longer, no, and have their own timings for you know transforming and entangling with all forms of life. But it's interesting because also there's this double and parallel connection into the saving of the glaciers and the saving of ourselves, I think, in the time that we are speaking. And who is gonna save who, or what is possible? Who is possible to to save who? No, because really, like to save the glaciers. No, I was also at the Paris UNESCO conference and all of that, but to be realistic, that needs drastic change in our ways of living. And everyone's talking about what to do, but no one is really doing it.
Yep.
So that's a challenge. And in the end, I think through listening through glaciers and also through engaging with glaciers, they can also teach us how to change in a way that actually what we can save maybe it's ourselves and humanity from this, because you know um yeah, we are it's more possible probably that humans will get extinct than and maybe glaciers as well, but the earth keeps with its own um yeah, its own story, and new glaciers appear and all of it, but we are in this track of yeah, of extinction of species, and eventually maybe, I mean, no one knows, but I think it's an interesting crossroad between say there's something very interesting to explore between saving the glaciers and our own saving a species, if that makes some sense.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's a beautiful point, Nefur. That's really fantastic. It may be the case that the glaciers save us, that we can really learn from them in their long time horizons, right? Their sort of wisdom of living in these really long geological ages, because we humans have these really short lifespans. And so, in some ways, we're really naive little creatures that just we're like fruit flies compared to the glaciers. We have such a short time to learn things. We live and die in like the flash of an instant compared to these glaciers that are so wise and that their learning experience.
Yeah, it's true. So yeah, I think there's an interesting point, but there is that is in the end is still connected to glaciers, and it's still connected to listening to these guardians of water, and listening to their process and engaging in opportunity that is maybe only available to our generation as a direct experience with them.
Mhm.
So I think that's something that it's good to be aware of. And yeah, I think we will wrap it up soon. It's been super nice and super inspiring express chat, and I'm sure there'll be more. But I was thinking as well, with all this story of Ock and how unnoticed it has been as glacier over history, and that at this moment in history, it has, we could say, um, in a way, chosen two women like you and I to tell their story. And as you are probably familiar with also the hydrofeminism and feminist perspectives in your research. So, what do you think of the fact that a very significant and relevant glacier for what we are talking about, but a small glacier, has chosen two women like you and I to carry this story, and how do you think it can parallel the act of making visible an unusual small glacier with the work of making yourself visible as a woman in your field?
I love that. I love that. I love that you're bringing in the gender dimension and the kind of hydrofeminism. I think the fact that Ok was this small glacier, a humble glacier that doesn't take up too much space, that doesn't demand dominion, right? It was never an assuming glacier that spread itself out over the mountain and took over too much space and tried to dominate the landscape. It was always a very humble glacier. And you brought up the question or the topic of hydrofeminism, which made me think that, the final resting place of Ok actually is at the bottom of a lake on the very top of Ok Mountain.
Hmm.
This lake is called Blauvatn, which means blue lake, and it's the newest lake in Iceland. And Blauvatn is a lake that's formed in the crater because Ok Mountain is an extinct shield volcano. It's a volcanic mountain. And so the crater at the top of the mountain, when the glacier receded, right, when Ok Glacier receded, the ice fell down into the center of the crater and it lay down in the center of the crater. And then the meltwater and the snow and the water that collected over time created this lake,
Hmm.
Alvaten. And so basically the ice at the bottom of the lake that's holding the lake in place, that's making the lake exist,
Hmm.
is the final remains, the resting place, the final body of Ok
Yeah. Yeah.
down there. And it's creating this lake. And this lake is the source of new forms of life. There,
Yes.
there's over a dozen forms of life in there. Little like rotifers, these little like tiny, tiny, tiny microscopic creatures, rotifers, and these little creatures like running around in the water. Tiny, tiny, tiny. You can only see them in a microscope. But one of them has never been seen in Iceland before. It's a brand new creature that's never been there before. So this
Uh,
lake is the source of new life,
yeah.
just like women.
Wow.
It's like a little icy watery womb that's creating this new life, and
Wow.
it's coming out of the source of Ok. So I sort of can't think of a better metaphor for women and ice and new life and hydrofeminism than that story of Blauwatten.
I'm so fascinated by this new piece of information. So, because when I went to Oak, I just hiked on the snow. And so, is this lake, maybe it was frozen, is this lake on where Oak was, or it's a bit further down?
It's at the very top. If you go to the very top of the mountain, like if
Yes.
you know where that cairn is at the very top where
Yeah,
people have
yeah, yeah, yeah.
put all
Yeah,
those
it's probably there, but it's probably frozen when I went. Yeah.
go up there and then you look down.
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
way it's down in the crater. It's
Yes.
not very big, but it was probably frozen over with
Probably
ice.
frozen, and I can recall like over the snow like a piece of blue that looked like frozen water. So
I'll send you a picture of it and you'll see it and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
that's
And
great.
you can get there during the summer, you can get
Yes,
there
I will.
carefully. You have to go down there carefully, but it's a kind of a shallow enough entrance that if you come around the edge of the caldera, the cone there, you can get to the lake. You
That's
can walk.
fantastic. And that makes me think, one of the upcoming activities and projects besides like the that was meant teasing like with the glacier drop ancestor club is doing actually performances, singing in the glaciers a little bit with an audience, a little bit as I did when I went for the first time, but this time being bringing people with me and being able to experience the place in a felt embodied way. And I think going to glaciers also always involves lots of logistics, but going to arc in the summer could be a very good starting and first prototype of the experience maybe. So yeah, just shouting this out there, so it will probably happen. So you can also keep in touch for that if you're interested to going to arc with me and singing or hear me sing in there.
I
So
would love, we need to go to a glacier together, Nefur. Need
yes,
to.
we have to. Let's do it this year. Yeah. International Year for Glacier Preservation. I think we definitely need to meet in person, Cymene. And it was so fantastic to chat with you again. I don't know if there's any last notes that you want to say. There is, lots of other things that Cymene is involved at this moment, like the Global Glacier Casualty List, as you probably know from the previous episode. And there's new research you're doing into that. And there's the Glacier Graveyard performances that maybe, I don't know if you want to mention anything about as a finishing note.
Yeah. Or maybe if you keep on doing the podcast, we can talk, maybe we could talk in the future about another project. I'd love to tell you about some
Yeah.
of the other projects between glacial melt and sea level rise.
Oh
I have a
yes.
really cool project around that we could talk
Okay.
about.
Let's chat about let's the second part then. Yeah, and I'd love to
Excellent.
hear about the connection with the glacier melt and sea level rise that I remember you mentioned at some point, and sounds super fascinating. So thank you so much, Simone. Thank you everyone for listening to the Glacier Song. And yeah, just keep in touch. You'll have links in the description for everything we talked about. And yeah, just keep in touch for future events, projects in relation to glacier sound and embodiment and spirituality. Thank you so much.